All right, thanks, Todd. Rest assured that my presentation will not take the 40 minutes, so we will still get out of here by 3 o'clock today. I just want to congratulate you all on making it this far into the afternoon. So thanks for being with us here today, and I will be covering the final presentation on CLS fungicide trial results and plans for 2022. So before I get into any trial results, I'd like to cover some materials and methods for our Cercospora leaf spot trials. Our trials are run as inoculated trials. We collect our own inoculum by harvesting heavily infested leaves in the previous year. We store those over the winter, and then we grind those into this material that you see here on the right picture. And we blow that on with this Gandy air unit across the sugar beet canopy when there is a dew. And this allows the material to stick. That allows us to get a nice even disease pressure across our Cercospora leaf spot trials. Here is a picture of a plot along with our tractor sprayer. So we plant 6-row plots. We treat the center 4. As you can see in the picture, the tractor straddling the center 4 rows. So that means that rows 1 and 6 are untreated. And we harvest the center 2 rows and make our Cercospora leaf spot ratings in the center of the plot as well. You can see our sprayer here in the background. We use CO2 as a propellant at 60 PSI. We use flat fan nozzles, 20 gallons per acre for our spray volume. You can also see here that our sprayer has a shield on it. This is to eliminate the variability caused by wind changes in speed or direction throughout spraying the trial, and also prevents the off-target movement of treatment A into treatment B's plot, right? So we get nice results with our trials. We had trials at several locations this year. One of them was near Claris City, another south of Hector, and then also near Renville. This is a drone image of the Claris City location. We run all of these trials as randomized complete block designs with 4 replications. Really, all that's telling you is that each of these treatments is randomized in each of these ranges once. So each treatment appears 4 times throughout the entire trial. At this location, we have the high Cercospora tolerant variety trial here on this side. And then on the south side of the trial, we had our program trial. And you can see the nice pattern that you get in this trial when you treat the center 4 rows and leave the outside 2 rows untreated. So you get an unofficial disease pressure check across the entire trial. So you can see that we get a really nice even disease pressure across these trials. It doesn't look quite as cool when you're looking at the high Cercospora tolerant trial because of the genetic tolerance. You don't get an even disease burn down across the untreated check rows. We use the KWS Cercospora leaf spot rating 1 to 9. Steve kind of showed you that a little bit already, but the 1 is basically very little disease, up to the 9 being crispy brown. The ratings are taken by 4 or 5 SMBSC research staff, and so the numbers that you see in this presentation today are an average of those raters. So I'll go into our first trial site. I'll talk about Hector first with our fungicide screening trial. So just a reminder, we've done this trial for a number of years. The fungicide screening trial is designed to look at new products and compare those to our existing products, or perhaps just look at different tank mix partners, look at different additives, and also just keep track of how our current products are doing on regard to resistance development and if they are losing their efficacy or maintaining it. This trial is planned on April 29th, inoculated July 8th, first fungicide application June 29th, and harvested on September 10th. So I'm going to have a series of graphs that look like this. So I'll explain the first graph. This is the rating, KWS rating scale on September 8th. Our treatments are here on the y-axis, and then our rating scale 1 to 9 here on the x-axis. So again, 1 is good, progressively getting worse the higher the number is. So this particular one, we're looking at a lot of the different triazole products, Inspire XT, Provosol, and several others, as well as our tin product. One thing to point out here, you may not be familiar with Regev, that is difenoconazole plus a tea tree oil. And then Lucento has been around for a few years, but just a reminder that is Top Guard plus an SDHI. If you look at the ratings, they're very similar across the majority of the products on this graph. However, ProLine plus Manzate Pro Stick is substantially lower compared to the rest of them. Looking at the next graph, we have the check on this one at a 9 on September 8th. This was already a 9 on August 30th, actually. So you can see the level of pressure that we had from the disease. Looking at ProLine and Manzate Pro Stick alone, 5.9, 5.8, very similar. When you combine those together, that drops down to a 3.3. Looking at the treatments here, we're looking at some three-way tank mixes going on. So you can drop the disease rating a little bit, but you'd have to decide if that's enough to justify the additional cost compared to a 3.3. The last slide I want to show for the fungicide screening trial, additional tank mix partners that were tested. We have Inspire XT alone at a 7.6, with Oxidate 5.0 at a 7.8. We added Badge SC, so a copper product, to Inspire XT, and that dropped the rating from a 7.6 down to a 6.3. So we saw a substantial increase in our disease control. And when we add Inspire, our Manzate Pro Stick, to our Inspire XT, we dropped it from a 7.6 to a 5.1, so a 2.5 point decrease. So very significant decrease in the level of disease in that trial. Moving on to our CLS City site, I have two trials I'd like to talk about, the program trial and the high Cercospora tolerance variety trial. This trial was planned on April 24th, inoculated on June 28th, the first application made on June 30th, and harvested on September 23rd. So I'll first talk about the program trial. And so the program trial is really looking at treatments that are very similar to what the growers are using, and maybe tweaking them slightly with different additives, different tank mix partners, maybe just a different product placed in exchange for another one. So I'm not going to talk about too many treatments from that trial. Many of them are very similar, not seeing any differences. This is the ratings that were taken on September 15th. The treatments that I'd just like to touch on briefly. So our program was the standard triazole alternating with tin products with 6 applications. For this treatment, those main chemistries were tank mixed with copper in every application. So that was at a 7.2. The next treatment was a program with 2 copper tank mix partners and 4 EBDC at a 5.4. And then our standard program was all EBDC tank mix partners with the tin triazole alternation at a 3.9. So very similar to what we saw in the fungicide screening trial, where the copper was adding to our disease control, but the Manzate Pro Stick was adding more to it than the copper. So we can see that the more EBDCs that we added to our program, the more effective control that we had. Moving on to our Cercospora leaf spot variety tolerance trial. So just going over some materials and methods, because this trial is a little more complicated than the others. This trial is planted to 3 different varieties with varying levels of genetic tolerance to Cercospora leaf spot. So we had a KIB-US rating of a 4, a 3, and a 2 approximately. These ratings are developed from the Cercospora leaf spot nursery that's used to generate approval of the varieties. We planted these 3 varieties and treated each of them with 6 different fungicide spray programs. Seen here, we had a check, standard 6 spray program, 2 sprays early, 3 sprays early, 3 sprays late, and 2 sprays late. These letters here designate when the application was made over here in this box. And the objectives of this trial really were to determine the appropriate fungicide program for these high Cercospora tolerant varieties, including the timing and the number of applications. So looking at a very similar graph again, the treatments here on the y-axis and the rating scale on the x-axis. This is the traditional variety, so the 4.0 rating. You can see that none of these programs with reduced number of applications provided effective control for Cercospora leaf spot with their traditional variety. Really only the traditional 6-spray program tank mix provided effective control of Cercospora leaf spot with their traditional variety. Compare this to our high Cercospora tolerant variety. You can see that the 2-spray program starting late had the highest rating other than the control at a 3.9. When we started that 2-spray earlier, we decreased the rating to a 3.1. If we increase the number of applications to 3 versus the 2, we decreased the rating by a full point down to a 2.9 with the later applications. And with the 3-spray program, we also saw a decrease in the disease by starting earlier. So starting earlier and having at least 3 applications was beneficial, even with the high Cercospora tolerant variety. You can see here we have the 6-spray program at a 1.2, very little disease, almost none. So obviously the 6-spray program is going to be excessive for a high Cercospora tolerant variety under the conditions that we had this last year. So I'm going to go over the fungicide program for 2022, and then I'll get into some more material. So again, we're stressing that fungicide principles and how the applications are made are more important than the individual products that are being used. So we want to start early, and Steve touched on some of this also in his presentation, but just to reiterate, early applications are seen as being very important in our research this year and last year, as well as in the research done in other growing areas. So we want to start early, similar to this picture, maybe 4 inches apart before the canopy is touching. Always using 2 effective modes of action, alternating our chemistry, so our tin and triazoles, but as well as alternating our triazole products. Using a high volume for coverage, a minimum of 20 gallons per acre. There's a benefit even to going up to 25 gallons per acre. 10 to 12 day interval. Again, this all depends upon the environment in the given year. And I'll go through some spray application best management practices as well, covering nozzle specs and other things. So based upon what we saw this last year in the research, as well as out in the fields, we don't see a reason to change our standard fungicide program for our traditional varieties. Again, we want to start early with an EBDC alone, and then going into a tank mix program, alternating triazole and tin products. It's not important with what you start with first, just that you alternate those, and then using EBDC products as our tank mix partners as they are more effective. However, it is important that we scout. And if we are thinking that we might have to have a 7th application after here, we would maybe want to consider putting in a copper product in exchange for an EBDC to allow us to have an EBDC product later in the season to use. We are limited on the amount of product that we can use, and at our use rates, that is 7 applications of EBDC. For our high Cercospora tolerant varieties, again, not seeing a reason to change that from the 2021 program. We're looking at applying EBDC early, followed by a tank mix application, similar to the traditional varieties. In our trial work, the importance of starting early is seen clearly. So we'd like to encourage you to keep those applications the same for the first 2. However, after that, you're going to be able to extend your spray intervals, and just depending on the environment will depend on how long you can extend those intervals. And it's important to scout so you know what you're dealing with out in the field. And I'd also like to mention here something that Steve pointed out with his whiteboard and keeping track on some sort of a spreadsheet. If you have 45% of the co-op planted to these high Cercospora tolerant varieties, that means we have 55% traditional. So we're half and half. You're going to have to make sure you keep track of these fields. When you get to application 3, you might be spraying a triazole for your traditional varieties, but you might be spraying a tin for your HCT varieties. So it's important that we keep track of that so we're not spraying tin back-to-back or a Triazole back-to-back. So just some other things to consider that I'd like to cover. Product pre-harvest interval. Most of these products have not changed at all. Just as a reminder for you to look at the label while you're setting up your fungicide program and what products you'll be using. The only thing I want to point out here is that Domark is being marketed for sugar beets for Cercospora leaf spot. This is from Gowan. They no longer will be marketing the Eminent VP in the sugar beet market. So you won't see Eminent VP and Minerva put together anymore. That's because the Domark has a lower use rate at 6.9 fluid ounces compared to the 13 that Eminent VP had. PreWork Mix Awareness. You know, a lot of these products have been out there for a while. Point out, you know, the Regev has the Triazole and the tea tree oil. Lucento has that Triazole and an SDHI. There's nothing wrong with using the majority of these products. However, most of them are seen as only having one effective product in them for Cercospora leaf spot in our growing area. So we would encourage you to use an EBDC tank mix partner with any of these products as well. Just a reminder, glyphosate cannot be tank mixed with an EBDC product. So when you're looking at putting out that EBDC early in end of June or something like that, you can't tank mix that with glyphosate. There's conditioners added to glyphosate that could be detrimental to your EBDC product, as well as the metal compounds in the EBDC product having a negative impact potentially on the glyphosate. Again, application volume is very important. As you saw from the survey, from the limited number of growers this morning, most guys are using 20 gallons per acre or higher. However, there are some using a little bit less, and I would encourage you to increase your volume, as that's very important for successful coverage and control of Cercospora leaf spot. So we've seen an increase from 10 gallons per acre to 20 gallons per acre. Also, when we add a deposition aid, that can also increase the coverage that we have. And again, going up to 25 gallons per acre could also be increasingly beneficial. It is a balancing act when you're looking at your nozzles that you're using or the pressure. You know, they're all different. So we just want to say that we're looking for a medium droplet size. The fine droplets do provide better coverage under ideal conditions, but the majority of the time we're not spraying in ideal conditions because they are more prone to drift and evaporation. And if you have even a moderate wind over 5 miles an hour, that could be detrimental to those fine droplets. Compared to that, the medium droplet provides good coverage and is less prone to drift and evaporation. And if we add that deposition aid, we can get some nice coverage once it gets to the canopy as well. Just remember to check your nozzles for wear this winter. Also check your manufacturing recommendations for nozzle spacing, correct height of your boom. Those things are all important, and they vary depending on the angle of your nozzles. That way we get proper overlap as well as adequate spacing there for your nozzles. Testing your nozzles can be very important. If you look at this picture here, you can see that we have uneven spray distribution going across this table. And if you have areas in your field that are getting a sub-lethal dose or sub amount of coverage across a plant, that could just harbor disease and be a hot spot for Cercospora to develop in your field. So I'd like to cover another trial, the Inoculum Reduction trial. This is something that we've done the last couple of years, and is something that we were looking at to reduce the inoculum pressure or CLS pressure outside of the normal fungicide control during the season. So we had 5 treatments. We had an untreated control, Oxidate 2.0, tillage, badge SC, and heat. These 5 treatments were applied in the spring. In the fall, we were following sugar beets that were planted the following year. They were not applied with any fungicides, so they had a very high level of Cercospora leaf spot going into the next year. We didn't do anything with them. No tillage was conducted. The following year, we applied treatments. You can see here a picture of the propane burner burning the residue on the surface. Here's the bike sprayer applying the oxidate and badge treatments. and no additional tillage was conducted after the treatments were applied. So here are some graphs from all 3 years of the trial being conducted. We have 2019, 2020, and 2021. The KWS rating scale is on the y-axis for all 3 of these graphs. The date of the rating when that was made is on the x-axis. The 5 treatments are the colored lines, untreated in blue, the oxidate in orange, tilled in gray, and the badge yellow, and the heat in that light blue. You can see that we had a trend for the heat and the tilled plots to be a little bit lower in the disease ratings in 2019 and in 2020. However, there wasn't a lot of separation in some of the rating times. These plots were rather small in comparison to some of the other trial work we've done. We were very limited in the amount of space. So the plots were actually only 11 feet wide by 10 feet long. And we thought that by extending the size of these plots, we'd see a better separation in the treatment differences. So in 2021, we did extend these plots 11 feet wide to 35 feet long. And we actually did see a little better separation between the treatments, showing a benefit to either burning the inoculum or the residue and burying the inoculum. So we think that there is a merit to burying the inoculum. Now, this is something that maybe growers could practice along common lines or somewhere where they know that there's a high level of inoculum. Obviously, burning the inoculum or the residue does not have a practical use yet. However, farmers are innovative, and perhaps some of you out there have the ability to do that. So I'm going to switch gears here and cover some monitoring CLS resistance data from Dr. Secor. Just as a reminder, these samples are collected every year by the ag staff. Over 100 fields were sampled late this season and sent to his lab for resistance testing. So looking at this graph, we have a percent of fields sampled on the y-axis, and this is a percentage of field samples with an EC50 value greater than 10. So basically, this is just an indication that that is resistant. It's important on this graph not to compare the products, as the products all have a different EC50 value, but just to look at an individual product and look at the trend of that product across years. So if you look at tetraconazole or Eminent Minerva and Proline, the trend for those is very similar. We didn't see a lot of change for that from 2018 to 2021. However, the Inspire XT or Provosol did increase here in 2019 to 2021. So obviously increasing levels of resistance is a concern. Moving on to tin resistance levels. So we got 2 graphs here. The first graph is the percent of field samples with a spore germination at 1 ppm tin. So these spores are tested in a petri dish that has that 1 part per million of tin. And this is just indicating if there were any spores that germinated in that sample. So you can see that we did have a jump from 2020 to 2021 in the percentage of fields that had any amount of resistance in them, and it's actually getting really close to 100. The second graph here is the percentage of the germination within a sample. So if we look at the number of spores or the percentage of spores that germinate within a sample, we can see an increase there as well, 2018 all the way up to 2021. We can see that getting close to 60% of the spores germinate within the samples. So we see an increase in the disease severity as well as the incidence. This is a map of the sensitivity to QOIs, or strobilurins, common products via headline Praxer. You can see that we still have widespread resistance with the red dots being 100% resistant. So QOIs or strobilurins still are not recommended for use in our area for Cercospora leaf spot control. I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of our cooperators, especially Raleigh Ammerman, Jeff and Scott Buboltz for working with us on Cercospora leaf spot trials. They are very important and could not be done without you. I'd also like to thank our industry partners for their support in providing product and also ideas for Cercospora leaf spot control, and to all members of our ag department that help with rating or with the trial work. Then we have the Certified Crop Advisor CU credits. Please scan the QR code if you have not done that yet to receive credit for attending today. Todd?